We are live with Now You See TV, and don't go anywhere because we have a very exciting show, True Legends Little Nephilim. And like always on Saturday nights, we have John Hall and David Carrico, and we have a special guest tonight, Gary Wayne, and we're going to be talking about this stuff. So make sure you guys stay tuned. But before we start the show, I want to tell you guys something about let me pull this picture off here, but I want to tell you guys what we are giving away today. Okay, this is Gary Wayne's book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and I think my screen may be mirrored, but you get the gist. This is the book. It comes with a bookmark, a Genesis 6 Conspiracy bookmark, and it's also signed by Gary Wayne himself. He when we had them on the conference in Evansville, Indiana, he gave us these to give away on the show, and I was waiting until we had him on next to give these away. So stay tuned for the show to find out how you can win this book, and I will give you guys the parameters on how to win. It's pretty simple. It's going to be a random pick, but you have to do two things. You have to like Now You See TV, and you also have to share the link for this show tonight that we posted on Now You See TV's Facebook page. So make sure you guys go do that. Go ahead and do it right now. We're picking a random winner. The system we have picks random, and the system is my son, my 5-year-old son, comes up, and I show him the share list, and he goes, that one. And that's how we picked it last time. And that's my random pick right there. And that's as random as he can't read yet or anything. So you guys are just as good a chance as anybody else of winning that competition. So anyways, John, David, Gary, welcome to the show. As always, it's a pleasure to have you guys.
Well, it's just a great honor for me always to be here. I just with John and Gary Wayne is one of my favorite people. I love being on with Gary. It's always, we know we're going to learn a lot. We're going to be challenged and blessed. So I am just thrilled, as always, to be here.
Same here. I'm glad to be back and really excited about what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm just kind of anxious to get into it. And I think there's probably a few things that we're going to talk about that are going to surprise all of us.
Most definitely. Every time I get you and David together, you guys are you feed off each other with this information, and it's amazing, really. And we did a show before about little people back. I don't even know how long ago. It was a long time ago. But this one, I feel like we've all had time to kind of reflect on it. David's been studying. You've been studying this stuff for years, and this is interesting stuff. John, do we have any other announcements? You're going to be moderating the chats tonight. So let people know the rules. Let them know how they can get into the private chat and all that stuff.
Can you guys still see me? I'm sitting there. I got like 8 windows open, and I'm clicking through them. I thought I lost you guys.
Yeah, we can see you.
So you want me to moderate chat, and I'm just sitting there with 8 windows open. Don't know if I'm still on the show or not. That's dangerous. That's pretty dangerous. It's going to be a great show tonight. Hey, guys, we're fellowship. That's what this is all about. Post your questions in the Now You See TV chat room. If you are in YouTube and you want to ask David and Gary any questions, please go to nowuctv.org. Hit the link for this show, and you'll get in the chat room so you can ask them questions. Just ask you guys to be respectful and be mindful of who you are in Yeshua and the throne room that you're sitting before right now. And we ask that you guys enjoy the show. And without further ado, we're going to be talking about little people. And
I want to let you guys know too, John will delete you. He will block you. And if you don't want to be blocked, please control yourself. And you know, and when there's situations when you're real disruptive over the subject and all you're doing is trying to argue with people, that disrupts the flow of fellowship and everything, and we don't want that. We want people to have a good time, enjoy the conversations at hand. We don't want a constant fight going on or just random stuff like that. That's not what we're here for. I mean, you don't go if you were all in person, you would not be fighting the way you do online. So think about that. Think about if you're seeing the person on the other end of this typewriter, or not typewriter, it shows how what I started on. Okay, the person on the other side of the keyboard, they are human beings just like you. They have feelings. They love, have all these issues, and just like you do. So please be respectful for sure. And I guess, David, you go ahead and lead us off, get us started, and let's go.
All right. Well, I am just excited to have Gary with us tonight. In his book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, he has some very compelling chapters on this subject. And the more that I look into this, the more I believe this is one of the really overlooked areas of study into the structure of the Dark Kingdom and of the things that went on in the antediluvian world. And I'm going to let Gary introduce this subject. And we've got some very compelling visuals tonight that we're going to let Gary comment on. And we're going to play Name That Devil. We're going to have Name That Devil and Name That Devil the home game. And we're going to have some very interesting and compelling visuals. And with no further ado, Gary, just introduce this topic to our listeners. I'm sure there's many that have never heard about this before, but tell us about the little Nephilim. And I'm using Rob Skiba's broader definition. Rob says that he believes the word Nephilim not only applies to giants, but to the half-human, half-animal creatures, and also to some of the little guys we're talking tonight. So take it away, Gary.
Well, and particularly when you hear or dig deep into fairy mythology, you find it encompasses a lot of beings within the fairy category, let alone with what you were referring to with Rob. But I think one of the key sort of connections there that when you get into this mythology is that they are essentially referred to in a lot of writings as reprobate spirits, just as the Book of Enoch refers to the Nephilim as. And that tends to be, and although it's very difficult to get at, a significant amount of literature or writings out there as to how the little people are formed. What you do from the little bits that you do piece together, whether it's out of Norse mythology or Greek mythology or Native American mythology, because again, these little people are that little known common heritage that's on all continents and all cultures that are unaccounted for and are linked here. And so I just lost my train of thought on the point I was going to make there, but they are taken back to created by the gods somehow, whether or not, and if you get into like the nymphs or the nereids of Greek mythology, you know, you have Nereus, which is a god of the sea and son of another god, and a female named Doris, for example, who is the sister of Clymene that marries Poseidon to create the Titans in Greek mythology. So very quickly, just using that one, that's why I started with that. It just sort of connects those dots very quickly that they are part of this realm of the Nephilim and the mystical religions. And the types of little people that are created were created for specific roles within, and I liked how you put it, the Dark Kingdom, David, of the ancient epochs, and as they roll forward. And again, in the mythos, there is a survival story within the fairy mythology of these types of little people. And the little people category is part of a larger sort of allegory and group of beings. And you know, the four main categories, when I did my research, I found there was the fallen angels, the ones who come from the other planets. These are the rebellious angels that were led by the proud angel, as fairy mythology goes, and they rebelled to set up their own realm separate from God, because they knew that they couldn't defeat God, but they were looking to have their own separate realm, just as what you might be looking at in the Star Wars movies that are out lately. So they're trying to fight for the rebellion. Again, very similar allegory there, and they just do an inside-out allegory of good and evil in Star Wars to keep you fooled. And it's the mystical belief system. And then you have the earthborn fairies, right? These are the demigods. And again, typically, a lot of the little people will come out of a demigod type of arrangement. And these are, in the fairy mythology, the Tuatha De Danann, which were a significant race, and one of the big races of prehistory that were, equal to the pharaohs as they come out of the flood. They're one of the pure fairy people, and they are called fairy people. And then you have the daemons, which are the bodiless spirits, right? The spirits, whether or not you're talking about sprites or pixies or whatever, and They have a common relationship with the little people. And then you have the fourth class, which is the elementals. And the elementals all around the world are split into three categories, three main categories. And so, and within those three categories are other subspecies within it. So they have nuances or differences, and whether or not that became so many because of all the different cultures writing about them, or there were actually that many of these little beings of different species or races or whatever in prehistory, we don't know, but we certainly get a lot of different kinds. And one of the things that happens when you have so much mythology is some of the identification of these fairies, they begin to blur together, and they're hard to tell the difference, right? But they do have some main categories, and I think the blurring is just sort of the telling of the stories and the mythology over millennia. But again, you can take them back to a basis, and then there's also the allegorical aspects of the fairy and what it means in the whole Nephilim bloodline. And then you have the religious aspect that comes out of the fairies, which is part of the elven bloodline, as they like to call it, of Gnosticism and Catharism and Albigensian crusade is uniquely created because Elbe comes out of the root word of Elbe, which comes out of elves, as you take that back in etymology into history. And so all of these things tend to come together, and so it's a very large subject in terms of the beings that you're talking about, and all the different allegories and all the different things that are going on with the religions and the bloodlines and everything else, let alone the whole concept that it can umbrella a whole bunch of other different beings, as Rob Skiba likes to talk about.
Yeah. And Gary, could you expand a little bit more on the elementals? You said there were three groups.
Yep.
And the reason why these interest me so much, a couple of reasons, because the elemental spirits are something I've studied quite a bit in scripture. They're called the Stochii, and this also ties in very much with the Celtic, the fact that the Galatians, the book that John and I are collaborating on, because the Galatians were the Celtic people. This is the scripture passages that speak of the Stochii, and of course, when the Celtic mythology, they talked about these little people being the elemental spirit. So I would very much like to hear you expand on these different groups of the elementals.
Okay. So you've got, as I said, you've got three different groups, and I'll just sort of quickly list them and then talk a little bit about each category. Because I think, and I might even talk a little bit about a couple of the ones that might blur, but as we get into that, that'll help sort of identify it. And so when we talk about elementals, we're talking three groups, and those are the gnomes and the goblins, which is one distinct group. And within the gnomes and the goblins, you're going to have a number of other ones like dwarves, right? You're going to have dark elves, which are different than light elves, and I'll talk about light elves separately. And you've got trolls, and you've got the hobbits, and they tend to live in the earth, a lot of them, or in the mountains. They tend to have a very good skill set in craftsmen, whether it's in steel, making tools, manufacturing things, building things, as in the Menuhe of Hawaii are very known for their wisdom and their building. And they are generally anti-human, and they tend to kidnap people, right? They take human children away. They do experiments on it. That's where the gray alien comes in. That's the category called little grays, right? That's where the elves of Santa Claus comes from with Krampus. Again, these are the dark elves, not the light elves. You also have gnomes, which are part of the water nymphs at times, but that's more of a blurring. That's more female, but you can have male water nymphs as well, but that's more into another category. And Pericles, called them a Nomi or Genomi or earth dweller. And they called them an earth elemental or a pygmy person, as they were sort of understood in Greek history. And of course, gnomes also goes back to the root word noble, G-N-O-B-L-E in Greek, which is the source for gnosis and Gnosticism, because gnomes were also, when I talked about being assigned to specific jobs, gnomes were specifically to look after the archives of the knowledge and the genealogies, right? They, again, understand that each of these have specific categories. So hopefully that gives us sort of a quick understanding of who the first category are, the ugly ones, right?
I got a quick question for you. You mentioned nobles. Is this the same nobles that we hear about as the people that are of the elite class?
Yes. That's again, it's that allegory, double entendre play on words that all roots back together. So when you hear about the noble Celt that David was talking about, or the noble class, this is that fairy allegory that's been overlaid that, again, they hide right in front of our eyes. But it goes back to their belief system of these reprobate beings that were created in prehistory.
Now,
and then you have, go ahead.
One of your chapters in your book is entitled The Fairy Kingdoms, and there are several chapters that has real good information in Genesis 6, and I would just highly recommend this book. This is one of my go-to books that has so much information on so many of the subjects that I'm interested in, and I know that so many of our Now You See TV listeners are also interested in, and you would not be disappointed with this book. It's a book that I go to repeatedly, and in your chapter on the fairy kingdoms, you talk about, it's interesting, you talk about the legend of them being the keepers of the genealogies, and you talk about in the Celtic traditions of the fairy blood and the fairy bloodlines. How does that all wash out in the big picture?
Well, and Druids also were in charge of keeping the genealogies. And so if you look at the Neroids that were in Atlantis, they were around the religion and the kings as well, right? So this is a common sort of understanding. And so they worked together to develop the knowledge, as we know as the seven sacred sciences, and the bloodlines that were establishing the dynasties and continued after the flood to do so. And so when we talk about this as part of the fairy kingdoms, this is part of that ancient sort of organizational architecture, right? And so when I talk about the Druids, they're the wizards, they're the Merlins, right? They're the Magi, they're the wise ones, they're the ones with these funny hats. They're the priests, right, of the seven sacred sciences, and these other reprobate beings are like their slave class workers doing their beckoning. And in this case, the gnomes were to guard the knowledge, right? Just as trolls are gatekeepers, right? They all were created for a specific purpose in governing the ancient world for the Nephilim kings.
Yeah. In your another chapter in your book, you call Sex, Lies, and Fairy Tales.
Yes.
Quite snappy little title. And in that, you talk about C.S. Lewis and the Narnia Tales. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's full of Rosicrucian symbolism, and it's full of these interesting little beings, and he was best friends with Tolkien, who does the Norse overlay of the fairy mythology, and they're both best friends, they're both Rosicrucians, and they're both Freemasons. And so they're just, even though they claim themselves to be Christians, you have to understand Gnostics, because they draft Jesus into their belief system as a prophet, but not Son of God, a mortal person, and who has a bloodline, is they call themselves Christians. So that's why they can sort of move in and about. They just don't have the monotheist Christian belief. They have the fairy belief, or the Aryan belief, or the Nazi belief of polytheism that they're homogenizing together. So, yeah, I mean, they are, but what's encoded in there is the history, right? Both of them do it. They just do it from a little bit different angle.
Yeah, and to me, it's just another attempt to sanctify paganism and repackage it and feed it to the children. And
yeah,
I just...
So I wanted to also finish off on the other two groups of the elementals, so that people can sort of box the ones that we're talking into. So you have the little people, which is a specific name, and these are the good-looking ones, right? This is also where the light elves come into, right? They're not the ugly ones; these are the good-looking ones, and this is where sort of Tinkerbell fairies come in, right? And the light elves, and you're going to like this when you're talking about the Celtic, and I'm also always going to talk about the Norse aspect, because you have the Tuatha De Danann who come out of Scythia that went into both the northern regions of Germany, Denmark, and Norway and Sweden, and over to the British Isles. So you have two sort of flavors here, and that's again what Tolkien was bringing to the table. And so the light elves, they can be seen as sort of the perfect Celt, or the perfect Norseman, or the perfect Viking, or the perfect sort of Tuatha De Danann in this allegory, where they have blonde hair and blue eyes, again, which should scare people in that sort of allegory, or red hair and green eyes, and of course with pale skin. And of course elves have pointy ears in this classification, where the other ones may not, although goblins do. But these are the good-looking elves, right? And then the fairies are also part of this allegory of the gods and the queens, as in fairy godmothers and fairy queens, and very good-looking. And so when we have that picture that introduced the show tonight, where you have this white phantom female, and that's actually what Guinevere is in King Arthur in the allegory, because they're from the Tuatha De Danann and descending down from the Tuatha De Danann, and she is a fairy queen. And there's fairies all through King Arthur, whether or not it's Vivienne or Morgan Le Fay, which is French for fairy, the fairies of the lake that guard the portals, right? Because portals are all part of the fairy culture, including fairy domins. But Guinevere goes back in translation into Welsh and in ancient Irish as actually being a white phantom, right? Which is part of the Lilith aspect, right? That is going down the female bloodlines of the Nephilim throughout the ages, because fairy is the matriarchal bloodline as the allegory that I was talking about. So they interconnect and weave these things all throughout. And so and there's some other good-looking fairies as well, but you understand when we're talking about good-looking fairies, this is the little people, and the other one is the leprechauns. And the leprechauns are if it's Native American, they're the laurel people, is what they like to call them, and these are smaller ones, smaller beings, and they're known for mischievous pranks, and they're smaller than the dwarfs even. And they can be very evil. They're beings of light and beings of magic. They like to dance and party and dance around fires and things like that. So, and they're very solitary creatures. And they're also closely related in old Irish history to the Cluracan, which were even more of a surly type of, nasty type of evil one. So you've got the mischievous ones, you've got the good-looking ones, and you've got the ugly ones. That's how the elementals break out, and they all have specific roles, right? Like leprechauns are also, guarding this treasure at the end of the rainbow. Two significant allegories there: the rainbow for the flood, which connects them back to the antediluvian time, and the treasure is always knowledge, right? So they're very much connected into this whole mythology. So understand there are three classifications of little people, and of course out of the ugly ones come the gray aliens, which takes you into another complete sort of mythos.
And what we're talking about as we listen to you bounce all these things over, we're talking about the Grail literature, that these things are deeply intertwined in the Grail literature. And
Yep.
in your book, you talked about another Freemason, Walt Disney, and
yeah.
the role that he has played in keeping this Grail literature and making very pretty pictures of these dark little creatures and selling it to her children. But talk a little bit about the role of Disney in this.
Well, of course, he's a Freemason, and also there's a lot of Rosicrucian symbolism in these cartoon characters that he has created for animation. And it was his personal goal and role to feed this information and keep it alive in a new medium to the children, to, you know, make them more acceptable. And again, this is all preparation for the end time when they're going to unload all of this stuff on, because in fairy mythology, they believe that that belief system is coming back in the end time. And it's going to be one of the great belief systems, I guess, of all of the different aspects of polytheism. And it's the one that they also connect back to pharaohs, as in fair coming out of fairy, right? They really connect all those allegories. But if you're talking about the seven dwarves, every character is representing a different type of dwarf that are in these subgroups of the ugly ones and the subgroup of the dwarves, right?
Wow.
They're there for a reason. They're an allegory keeping this whole history alive. And if you're talking about, you know, the princesses in Sleeping Beauty, right? Okay, that's a fairy queen and fairy godmothers, and everything that they do in there is just a repetition of these horrible reprobate spirits that most of them were not very kind to humankind. In fact, a lot of them would lead humans to their death. And actually, the light elves, and of course the larger elves, because in the light elves you have larger ones and smaller ones, at least in their mythology they did, they considered themselves superior to humans.
Yeah, and there was a book called, the UFO book of, I can't think of the name, by the Frenchman, about Magnolia or something. But anyway, his theory was that these little people that were the fairies back then, that they are, just like you say, the gray aliens now. And throughout all of these traditions, one of the common threads that keeps reoccurring is their ability to shapeshift and change form. And what do you think is going on there as to their basic nature that allows them to do this?
Not in all of the various elementals do they have shape-shifting capabilities, but in many of them they do, especially in leprechauns and especially in elves and dwarf classifications. And so this is being kept alive for a reason, right? So, and probably for the larger categories, that might even include the Nephilim, the descendants of Nephilim, that they have the shape-shifting ability. So I think if we look at it that these aliens can have the ability to shapeshift because they're actually fairies. They can give you a look of many different species of aliens, right? And so they can, again, create a whole new mythos that's designed for a technologically advanced civilization that we are, just as they went at it in sort of the fairy sort of imagery in days past, so that they play to your already predetermined or pre-prepared ideology, right? You may not know it is, but the seeds have been planted, and you're ready for that. And if people haven't read my book and they don't know about these little gray neighbors that they like to call them in Scotland, they believe that, and I put an account of this in my book. I give an account where they steal children for a fortnight, and they do experimentation on them, and then they return them, and the people can't remember them. And the description, and they have flying machines, and they come through portals, shays, as they're called in fairy mythology, just as In a lot of alien mythology, they come through either the water, which are, again, portals covered by the ladies of the lake, and King Arthur is another allegory, or through the oceans, or through the fairy mounds or the fairy domens, or even at Halloween they can come through these particular portals on certain kinds. But the point of the matter is the description I put in of these gray aliens and what they actually do. If you didn't know it was a fairy encounter, you'd swear it was a gray alien encounter. They are identical, and the description of these beings are identical. So they are totally intermixed into this alien sort of mythos that we're going through today. And if they do have that shape-shifting capability, again, that's what they say. I don't know whether they do or not. They can take many different forms, because we hear about reptilian ones and we hear about large hairy ones, and Star Wars is very good at showing all these different kinds, as the Star Trek and all these other scientific genres that are designed to prepare us for what's coming, because they want us to understand in the end time that we're part of a universe full of beings that are all fighting in a rebellion from the evil god they like to call our god, Adonai, who keeps us imprisoned in this physical world and in ignorance. That's what their belief system is. Now, my belief system, that's what they believe. So that's part of this deception that's coming in the end time.
And you mentioned the fairy mounds, and this is another deeply fascinating aspect of this whole thing. And there are many of these, a lot of them in the southern part of the British Isles. And many people really maintain that these mounds are the actual homes of these little people. And there have even been people that have claimed there was a fascinating book in the latter part of the 19th century that talked about people that even investigated these, and they found beads and food and different things in there. Do you think there's any credibility to these fairy mounds and the British Isles actually being the homes of these little creatures?
Yeah, I don't know whether or not they're homes, but I think they're more as portals. Is what their belief is into, and they could still be living in the ground as a portal into that, or it's a portal into another dimension. And again, it goes both ways on that. And these fairy domens that are around the world, these are these mini little megalith structures that look a little bit like Stonehenge. They're all over the world, thousands of them, and they're called domen, and they're called fairy domens. And what domen translates as is portal. So there's a whole sort of belief system within this belief system about portals to different dimensions. Just as if you get into the broader aspect of it, when they go into the other world where Tuatha Danann seemingly went, that's a portal to another world, right? Or into Tartarus would be a portal into another world, or as it's called in King Arthur and Wynne, that would be, again, portaling to another one. Or Peter Pan goes, into a portal into Neverland, right?
No.
This is a very, very common concept, and I don't know whether it's true, but my gut feeling is their belief is so strong that it's true, that there's a good likelihood that a lot of these are the portals. Just as I mentioned earlier, the alien mythos, which we've connected in, come through portals in much of their belief system.
Yeah, I could really see that. That makes a lot of sense. The portal idea, that does make an awful lot of sense. John, let's throw a couple pictures here, Gary. Do you have the one of the pyramid?
I think so. Let me look for it real quick. Hold on one second. I will get it popped up here. Oh, you're talking about the little hill. Here we go. Let's see.
The pyramid structure. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
What we're looking at here is called, this is in the Yucatan Peninsula, this is called the Pyramid of the Magician, or the House of the Dwarf. And I've got the Wikipedia article for this, and it's a really mind-blowing legend, but I'll just read a little bit of it for you. It says, It says, when a certain gong was to sound, the city of Uxmal was destined to fall to a boy not born of woman. The gong was struck one day by a dwarf that was born unto no mother, but rather hatched from an egg by a childless old woman. According to the tourist guide in Uxmal, this egg was an iguana egg, and the woman a witch. The sound of the gong struck fear into the city's ruler, and the dwarf was ordered to be executed. The ruler reconsidered the death sentence, though, and promised that the dwarf's life would be spared if he could perform 3 seemingly impossible tasks. One of the tasks was to build a massive pyramid taller than any building in the city in a single night. The dwarf ultimately completed all the tasks, including the construction of the pyramid. The dwarf was hailed as the new ruler of Uxmal, and the structure was dedicated to him. Now, but we've talked a lot of times about the role that the big giants played in the antediluvian megalithic structure. Do you think that it's possible that, pardon the pun, that we might have overlooked the role that our little folks have played in this?
Absolutely. And again, as I mentioned earlier, all of these particular classifications, and of course this one comes out of Central America, but it has these commonalities. So let me connect them. So yes, it's been overlooked. So the first thing is I said that dwarves were, they tend to live in the ground, and that's an Andor mountain, right? Okay, so they're on the mountains with the gods, right? So, and they were created to do certain things, and they were very skilled at crafts. They're building and at making weapons and at building things, just as the Menhue were prolific builders in the islands. So now we have another dwarf that's building pyramids as a key part. So if you connect those dots and into other sort of mythologies, is that they have something to do with the building of these megaliths. And if we talk about, the dwarves coming out of the ugly category of the gnomes, where they have the knowledge, they would have maybe be part of delivering the knowledge and bringing the knowledge that's been developed by, and in conjunction with the priests to build these structures, right? If they're part of that whole architectural structure or organization of the ancient world. So I think there's some significant commonalities, because most people think, well, the Nephilim just picked up these things and moved those rocks. Well, maybe if they were 400 or 500 feet tall or something, which, some people might say that's possible. The original ones using Enoch and 200 or 300 Ls or whatever they are, but nobody really knows what an L is. I think part of the labor force and the strength, but we're talking about a skill or an art or a craft, which is a technology, okay? Because in ancient history, arts and crafts were the same as sciences, right? They are the 7 sacred sciences. Yeah. And in this case, the art of masonry or geometry, which is the 5th science, right? And of course, pyramids, Freemasonry, masonry are all connected with that pyramid symbolism, which is again another connection. And what is so very, very popular in other mythologies is something called levitation or anti-gravity to do it. And I think if you, again, I know this is all speculation, but it has to be, because we can only connect dots. But if you connect things together and you say, how did they move these megalithic-sized rocks we can't move today and carve them to precise angles and joinery and everything? They used technology. And maybe it was something like that. Maybe it wasn't. But I do believe that these little people play a significant role in the antediluvian world in all aspects, and including building that is overlooked. And I guess that was it. That was a simple yes, but with a long answer.
Yeah. Yes, with a little gusto. And I like your idea on the portal, and you can see a connection. Like when you look at the big megalithic hinges, those definitely, you can see definitely that those were portals. And you've got the little dome houses of the little folk, and you've got the pyramids. And in all of these, you can see the strong connection with the concept of a portal. Now, John, can you bring up the picture of the Pyramid of the King's Chamber with the man going through the entrance there? Let's take a look at this. And this is something I bet a lot of people have not thought about.
Give me 1 second. I'm pulling it up here.
And that is in the Yucatan Peninsula, a Mayan pyramid. And it's still one of the best preserved of all the Mayan sites.
Is this what you're talking about? This is the best picture I have.
There
Okay.
we go.
Barely see it because it was a tiny picture that you guys sent to me, so you can barely see it, but there's a guy walking through the pyramids there. So I'll leave it up for a second, but it's such a granulated picture that I probably won't leave it up very long.
Okay. Well, and the concept here, we can get the idea. This is the entrance to the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, and you can see the man, he has to bend down to go through it because it's only 3.5 feet tall. Now, it's also interesting that the coffer in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid is the same size as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, why in the world would they make such a small entrance into the king's chamber? You think we might have some little people again with this pyramid, Gary?
Oh, I think so, and it's not uncommon in most large structures that are built that you have these tiny little entrances and low ceilings. Again, if you can imagine that these various types of little people are used for various roles, they would have no problem getting through these little tunnels or hallways or however you want to call them. And if you can imagine that these temples did more than just look good, that they're actively part of the religion for rituals and or some sort of sorcery that might, do magical things, because again, they're associated with magic as well, right? All of these, particularly with specific kinds of little people, magic is a significant part of it. So I think they were part of whatever was being operated through these megaliths and or pyramids and or other structures. They were the ones on the inside, and they were built in a size to do that. Just as they were built for interior underground working of factories. And again, you see that in Tolkien, where you have these underground cities and factories and things. I think they're telling us that this happened, maybe not quite exactly as Tolkien perhaps embellishes it and turns them into these other really strange orcs beings that maybe ogres, maybe something else that's connected. But the point of the matter is, this is where these types of people, these types of beings did the work for the demigods, right?
I'm looking at
this. This is a picture somebody posted in the chat right here. I don't know if that's
Right.
what you're going to talk about, but here's this one.
Look how perfectly made that is. It's not perfect, but look at that.
From another shot there, John?
Yeah. So many of them were 3.5 feet and shorter.
Yeah.
According to mythology. Some of them were larger. Some of them, are really, really small. But, if you're 3 feet or you're 2 feet or, you could get in through there, whether, and probably work rather comfortably. And I think, when people are looking for answers with these strange shafts, that's part of the mystery.
Yeah. I really believe it is. Yeah, that's a really good picture. And is that the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, John? Is that what we're looking at there, another angle?
I think it is. I'm not 100%
It
sure.
looks like it. I would say yes.
Yep. And, how many different cartoons are there out there, whether it's Disney, where they have these short little people that have magic wands and funny hats like the wizards and stuff, right? And they're enchanters. And again, that is just connecting them back to working for the priests and the Nephilim kings and the demigods of that period.
And it's amazing how much from the time we're a child that we're exposed to this through all the literature, all the television, all the fairy tales, how much a part of this is of the culture of all the peoples all over the world, and how the truth that this is such an insidious, dark little bunch of devils, quite literally. It's something, and you know, by the way, it's okay to speculate. It's okay to take the Word of God and look at these legends and make sense out of them with the Word of God. That's what we should do. We should take the Word of God and look for answers and understanding. That's what we should be doing. And there's nothing wrong with that, despite what some people would tell you.
Sure. And it's not just, you know, a modern thing. This has been something that's been kept alive over the millennia.
Oh,
and you've got, I mean, it's no coincidence that they like to keep Shakespeare so popular. Not that his work isn't good, but I mean, look at Midsummer's Night Dream and so many other plays that he writes about. It's filled with Rosicrucian symbolism, but particularly in Midsummer's Night Dream, it has fairies, right? Which is kind of crazy. And you've got pixies, and you've got, you know, again, pixies are kind of part of this leprechaun group that we're talking about, right? Or at least as goblins and brownies and imps are. And you've got King Oberon, who's the king of the fairies. And Oberon is a Tuatha De Danann term for overlord or overreign. And that word also connects back into history as you take its etymology back to Upiers, which is dragon, vampires and witches and Lilith and things like that. Because again, you got to go back into the Scythian aspect where that whole Celtic, British Isle ancestry really tends to come from in large doses in many, many different ways. And so all of this is connected. And again, Shakespeare is telling about these things for a reason, right? He's keeping the genealogies, the history, the belief system alive. And then he also does something which is very, very unique. And he connects them to Nephilim again. And most people overlook this is because King Oberon, king of the fairies, Tuatha De Danann, is married to Titandes, which is a female Titan.
Oh, boy.
Right?
There you go.
And that name comes out of Metamorphoses, so from Ovid, and it goes back into, you know, prehistory again. I mean, nothing is not, I shouldn't say nothing, they're not perfect, but so much of what they do is there for a reason for the initiated and the so-called enlightened to decode and understand and to keep their belief system alive right in front of our faces, even though we're supposed to be, you know, Western civilization is supposed to be Christian.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And as we are very well in a lot of the programs we've talked about, that in the legends of the Greek gods, what we call mythology, they called theology. And they were telling the theology of their gods through these stories, and they had an actual basis in fact in these Nephilim beings. And it's fascinating to me. I never knew that before, but if you look at these traditions, that the Nephilim, big Nephilim blood is actually connected with the little Nephilim blood.
Yes.
The traditions actually show the intermingling of these, the big and the little Nephilim.
Absolutely. And let me correct myself. I said Titandes. Her actual name is Titania. Titandes is the name of a female Nephilim or female Titan out of Greek mythology. But her name was actually Titania in Midsummer's Night Dream. So I sort of conflated the two there. But yeah, and even, you know, a lot of people think that the Tuatha De Danann, who were fairy giants, which were the earthborn fairies from the angels, were shrunk over time in an allegorical way. No, they just took advantage of this other allegory and have conflated the two, right? And so to make that history a little bit less known, and I'm sure the Christian church was very happy to take these giants and make them disappear into, you know, these fantastic imaginary little friendly elves and things, so then nobody had to deal with them. And of course they don't.
But sad to say, just because people don't believe devils doesn't keep the devils from affecting them. And, you know, this is one of the great blank spots that we so often encounter. But as I was thinking about this broadcast tonight with Gary, I put a call into my staff. And I asked my staff to draw up some visuals, and we've got some really compelling pictures here. And we're going to play Name That Devil. And we're going to put these pictures up, and we're going to, and Gary's already talked about a lot of them, but a lot of these are very compelling. And because these things have been so much a part of our lives from the time we were small, these visuals are very compelling to me, and I know they will be to you. But let's put the first one up, John, and let's play Name That Devil. Let's see if we can figure out what these little fellers are.
Okay, I have these and not in order saved in my thing here. I think if I remember correctly, this is the first one. So correct me if I'm wrong. But I think this is the first one. Am I right? And this is not. This is too big here. Let me see if I can shrink that down here. Is this the one though?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me get a better picture of this, or a smaller picture. This is way huge for this.
I can't see the face. So.
You can play Name That Devil the home game, and and you can actually see if you can beat Gary Wayne on Naming That Devil. But okay, is that the picture we see up here?
Give me 1 second. I'm going to share the screen and get a better shot of this. Can you guys see that better?
Yeah, there.
Yeah, I was going to say with the bow. I was going to say it's going to be an elf, and it's going to be a light elf, and it's going to be one of the larger ones. I didn't quite get can't quite see it. It's not a Norse elf. It's more of a woods elf, and it would come out of the British Isles in mythology. And of course, when you get into the elves of the woods, now you're into that whole pan god relationship and hobgoblins and things like that. That's where that all sort of centers through.
Mark in the chat room just said elven or wood elf.
There you go.
And they are spot on. And this is exactly what this is depicting, pardon the pun again, but this is a wood elf from the British Isles, and this once again connects with this idea of the elemental spirits, how that these elves were connected with the earth, air, wind, and fire.
Yeah, and of course, elf out of the British Isles goes back to AELF, and that will actually go back in etymology to El and into angel, and they also like to connect Eliphaz as part of that elven bloodline.
Like El, the father of the Canaanite pantheon, is that the El I'm talking about?
Yep. That's why.
Just what I figured. Just what I figured.
And of course, Eliphaz also married into the Amalekites, right? So
there we go.
The 12 kingdoms, or the dukedoms that they like to talk about in mysticism, that's where part of that comes from.
Absolutely. Then we get into, we talked on the show about antediluvian Job, about how the cave dwellers, that word actually means troglodyte. And that's actually what we're talking about. So you do see these creatures in Scripture, and it's just an amazing connections we can make. Well, let's put another one up on the screen there, John, our next picture.
Is that right here?
There you go.
Make that a little larger again for a second. I've got it. Okay, so that's a fairy, and it's got dragon wings on it, which is part of the little fairy allegory. So this is kind of in the same classification as I think Tinkerbell, and it's got the pointed ears like what you would see with a Tinkerbell. And again, that is also part of the, because of the color of the green, it's part of the wood elves, but this is a specific flying fairy, generally a female, good-looking fairy from the good-looking fairies. But the big part is the ears, which is why the light elves and the fairies are connected in that classification.
So Mark is saying pixie, and Fletcher in the chat room is saying nymph. Would they be close?
Well, nymphs are part of the good ones. Pixies, that's where it starts to blur, but they're more of leprechauns, right? But again,
Okay.
you've got green, and that's where that blurring comes. But pixies are more tricksters, right?
Right.
But I go back and forth sometimes between pixie, which classification it goes into. But generally, pixie is part of the leprechauns.
And Gary Wayne is spot on. That's exactly what this is. It's a fairy. And all of these associations are there again. And of course, you can just see this little fairy connected with the green and the forest and the foliage and everything.
Yep.
And the elemental concept is there. And always, it seems, the fairies are able to fly. This is one of the things that of all the, and we've got the light, like Gary said, the light and the dark fairies, and
Yep.
these little critters could fly.
Well, and a couple of other connections there is their wings. I mean, sometimes they like to say butterflies, but they're really connected to dragonfly wings, which is that overlay for the male bloodline. Because again, the fairy queens are married to the dragons, right?
Yeah.
That's the male bloodline. And just as the fairy queens will go back with flowers, they're always connected to flowers as well. But again, that's going back to Lilith, right? Again, back as to a lily or a lotus, the flower of the lotus, and also roses will tend to be mixed in with them as well. So look for, when they see depictions of these little Tinkerbell type fairies, to be around those types of flowers. That's where they typically like to take pictures.
Yeah. Let's put up the next picture. And I tell you, Gary Wayne's going to be tough to beat here on Name This Devil. He's tough. Let's put the next picture up, John.
There you go. I believe that's it.
All right. So name that devil. What do we got here?
Well, that looks like a phantom, a white phantom fairy. And again, that's part of the allegories that you see in King Arthur with Guinevere. And just to give people an understanding of what I'm talking about there, and I didn't really give it. So Gwyn is Welsh for fair, and it's thin or fair, and it all means a daemon spirit or a white phantom or a white fairy. I can't see a lot of it, but that should be a phantom, and that's part of the fairy queen allegory as a spirit.
Ian in the chat room asks, could it be a forest nymph?
I have to see it bigger again. It gets big, and then on my screen it gets down about this small, so that's why I'm leaning in to have a look at it. A forest nymph, yeah, it's, if there's green in the background, it's a little large for a nymph. That's one of the reasons why I didn't go to a nymph on it. And most nymphs are water nymphs, but it could be a forest nymph. But
Alec asks, go ahead. Alec is asking, what about a dark elf? Do you see anything?
No, it's too good looking. A dark elf is ugly, right?
Good deal.
And actually, Gary Wayne is on the money again. What the artist here was depicting was a female dark fairy. And so very good once again. And good input there from the chat. Good input. And like Gary said, a lot of these things are very similar. They're intertwined. And of course, we have to understand that we're looking at an artist's conception of these things, but we're beginning to get some understanding of these little devils. Pardon the pun once again. But let's put up another picture here.
There you go. There you go.
Now, this is a little tougher. This comes from a very famous episode that took place in fairy lore. What is this picture from?
Where? What? Out of a movie or a story you're asking about?
There was a movie made about this. There is
Right.
now on Netflix. There is a movie called Fairy Tale, the true story about this famous incident and these photographs.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Well, I can't tell you much about that. I mean, I don't know whether it's a legitimate paper, but it's a very old picture, so it doesn't look like it could be photoshopped, but who knows. But again, those are very much like those Tinkerbell fairies that are in there. But I can't tell you about the story or anything like that. But that would come out of the first classification of good-looking little fairies like Tinkerbell.
All right. Well, we've got, for the first time tonight, we've stumped Gary Wayne. So come on, room, name that devil. Now put the next picture up, because I believe there's another one of the same kind from this same episode. And there's actually been 2 movies that I know of made about this. And we'll give people in the chat. Yeah, there's another picture from the same series of photographs. Does anybody know in the chat? Is anybody getting it, John?
We've got from Martha a sprite. Mark says wood fairy. I'm looking to see. Somebody says they love this movie. We're getting a lot of sprites and fairies here. Cottontail fairies or Cottingley fairies?
Cottingley.
Martha got it then. Martha.
All right. Martha has named that devil and beat Gary Wayne for the first time tonight. All right, Martha.
So was that a sprite then?
Well, this is, and if you look at this last picture, you can tell that this is obviously a fake photo.
Yeah.
But this, in the 1920s in England, they had these 3 girls in England, and they claimed that they come up with these fairy photos.
Yeah.
And this created a furor. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, that wrote the Sherlock Holmes novels, he came and investigated it.
Right.
Harry Houdini traveled here to these girls. The Theosophical Society had all kinds of lectures about it. But sad to say, and there's 2 movies. One movie in the 90s called Photographing Fairies, and now on Netflix, A Fairy Tale, The True Story. But it's fascinating and a compelling story. But I think that most people would agree, just looking at especially this last photo, it's obvious a fake, wouldn't you say, John?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, nowadays anybody would be able to do it. Back then they didn't have that kind of technology to be able to do that kind of Photoshop, so they were kind of in wonder of how they did it. But yeah, I remember the story, and definitely nowadays anybody could look at that and say, yeah, that's definitely fake. So, but yeah, I don't know about the story itself, but those pictures, to me, I would not give any credence to whatsoever.
So what was it labeled as, a sprite then? Because that would be the only thing if it wasn't because it's in the same category if it's a sprite. So
yeah, they were just called just little fairies, wood fairies, and they were called the Cottingley fairies. And back in 1920, that fooled a lot of people, and it caused a huge uproar, and it just threw fuel on the fire of this whole fairy mythos. And you never know, they might have had them some actual contact with the evil side. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. But as far as their photos, I think we can say that these photos are definitely fake.
Yeah.
Unless fairies look exactly like cartoon characters that are
there you go. There you go. But hey, back in 1920, that was a pretty good job. Fooled a lot.
I mean, it probably fooled everybody back then because they weren't used. I mean, we're used to it. You look on Facebook, you see a Photoshop fake photo every day. So, I mean, you can easily spot that today. But back then, they had no idea what that. They didn't even know you could do something like that. It wasn't even heard of. So,
all right. Well, let's put up the next picture and let's name that devil.
There you go.
All right.
Where to go?
What do we got here? We're getting tougher as we go on. We're getting tougher.
Can you see it? Does it keep getting small? I try to present it to everybody on here because basically what happens is after I talk, somebody else talks and it shrinks it back down. But I think that it should be presented to everyone at this point. So maybe you can see it.
Looks like a box troll.
Box Trolls, the movie. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that.
Yep. One could say it's a possible gremlin, but or I would go with box troll.
Anybody in the chat want to take a stab at it?
It looks like a Chupacabra.
Yeah.
Wes says it looks like a Chupacabra.
Who, the lady or the little animal?
The little, I don't know which one. One said a crone. Who was that? That was
that's a good
Gerard.
guess. Yeah.
Gerard says it looks like a crone. Let's see. That's ghouls. Got a ghouls response from Brian. Gremlins from Mark.
Yeah, because they're all in the same category, right?
Yeah, they
all
are.
of those are the same type of ugly.
And what we're actually, and of course,
Ugly
we're
fairy.
talking about an artist depiction. So you
Yep.
know, but what this is supposed to be portraying is
Yep.
these. This woman keeps her imps in her trunk, and
An
she
imp. Yep.
and these little imps are at her beck and call because she keeps the little boogers in a box. So here again, we have this concept of being able to befriend these creatures and to control them, which is the basic theory behind all the evil.
Do you mean to tell me that that's not a real picture?
Yeah.
Well, it was probably done by the same one that did the fairy photo.
We
So
got lizard rats.
So when you see all of these movies and that are about gremlins or box trolls or funny furry little devils, these are actually out of the imp category. Because again, they're mischievous, right?
Yeah.
Right, and the imps are part of the mischievous group.
All right, let's put the next one up.
All right, give me 1 second here. You guys got a lot of work for me tonight. I like it. This Google Hangouts is a very I mean, it's not. I like it better than the other stuff, even though it's not as.
Now this one's everyone ought to get that one.
Yeah, it's a gnome.
And it looks like that little gnome's got him a Santa hat on. What's the connection of the gnomes and Christmas, Gary?
Well, gnomes don't have that much connection to Christmas. That one, I mean, it's got a hat like a gnome, but again, if you want to make that connection to Christmas, it's more, the little elves as being in there, but that face being like Santa Claus is quite unique.
That is.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to know how they connected a gnome to Santa Claus.
Well, let's put the next picture up, and we'll see if we can get.
It says it looks like a gnome from Travelocity.
There you go. It does, doesn't it? It does.
There you go. There's your next picture. There's a interesting picture. If I saw it out in my backyard, I'd probably have some target practice going on.
Yeah, I'm telling you. What do we think we got here? And it's interesting. Well, before I tell you what this is, and this is hard, probably no one will get this because this was actually from a Christmas card from Scandinavia. John?
Nina in the chat room says Norwegian Christmas troll.
We're going to have to give her a point for that because it's the same thing. Like there's so much overlap here, but this is actually a Tomte gnome. And in the Scandinavian folklore, they would run Santa's presents up. And what do you think is the connection with this gnome riding a pig? I think there's a definite concept being put forth here.
CB says Krampus.
Now, what I'm thinking is this looks, the pig speaks of unclean, and the pig speaks of something God forbids. And here we have this little devil riding the unclean beast. And I think the picture here of reveling in the unclean is what I get out of it. Now, that's just me.
Okay. I don't know why it would be riding a pig otherwise. I mean, it makes no sense.
Wouldn't know either.
Maybe the Legion thing where they were cast into the pigs, riding the pig. I guess you could call it that, but I don't know. That's what I thought.
It's curious that those aren't presents in the basket, that it's an apple.
Yeah,
of course.
That is interesting, isn't it?
And, in Gnosticism, which this is the belief system of, is the apple was from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was the fruit.
Nordic makes a point. He says referencing is Zeus's favorite sacrifice on his birthday.
There you go. Very good. And of course, that took place on December 25th.
Yes. Yep.
And Coach's sacrifice. Very good.
Yep. That would make sense. Yeah. That would make a lot of sense.
Very, very good. And also the apple is connected with Apollo. And
and when they carve up the apple, you get this look that is also traces the orbital pattern of Venus over a period of time in mysticism, which is Venus is an allegory for Lucifer. So that's another reason why they like the apple a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's put the next picture up. Name that devil.
Here you go, man. It looks kind of like my uncle, actually.
That's actually the moderator of the YouTube channel.
What? You call me?
That's John when he grows his hair and beard out.
Well, my gut feeling is that is a play on ogres.
Well, there's some interesting. See, we've got dwarf, org, Thor, mountain dwarf.
And whoever said dwarf got it. And this doesn't
really
look very dwarfing, but what?
No, it looks pretty big to me.
That was Kevin in the chat room that got dwarf first.
And Gary talked about this connection of the dwarfs and the builders, but this is depicting a metal working dwarf.
Okay.
And there's very much a connection between dwarfs and the concept of building. And and a lot of this, I am just, learning here with everybody else tonight because this is just such a fascinating subject. And let's put the next picture up.
There you go. Everybody's seen that.
Yeah, that's
7 dwarves.
And Gary, run us by us again about the 7 dwarves being 7 kinds of dwarfs. What was that again?
Yeah, so they represent 7 different classifications of the dwarf. So there's 7 different types of dwarves that have 7 different types of jobs that they do. It's all part of their mystical belief system. I can't name them all. I just know that that's what they've done. And just like in Peter Pan, when you see the little children, those represent different peoples. It's a common mythology. When you get into Robin Hood with the merry men, all of those merry men in that allegory represent specific people. They do that to, again, encode and to tell the enlightened or the initiated who they're referring to, and that's what they're playing along with when they watch the show.
We did an interesting show about that one time, Gary, about Pan and about all those different entities. I don't know when we did. I don't even know whose show it was on, but you were on somebody, I think maybe Jake show or somebody's show. We were talking about that stuff. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, there's actually a lady on the 3rd floor here that's possessed by Grumpy. All right, let's put the next picture up.
All right, give me a second here, guys.
Now, this is going to be tougher, but I bet Gary will get this one, and a lot of you will also. Well, yeah, a lot of people are going to get this. What do we got here?
There you go. You see that? It's this one's easy, Gary. You got this. Can you see it?
Yeah. It looks like Rumpelstiltskin. But it's pretty grainy, though. Can you make it bigger again? It just shrunk to about an inch size on my screen.
Maybe because every time somebody else talks after me.
Yeah, I can't.
I'll give you a hint if you can't see it. He's got a switch behind him, like a brush switch, and the child's scared of him. He's looking at the child in the face.
They've got a bunch of answers in the chat room.
And you got a Pope-like figure in the back. Think Swedish. Think. Think Sinterklaas's brother or whatever he is.
Well, yeah, but again, you're into the ugly dark elves, so it's hard to know what they're trying to portray. I can't even see the face, so
it's really a really bad picture.
Sure the picture Gary's looking at isn't too good. Does anybody in the chat room got it, Brother Hall?
Well, Alex says Rumpelstiltskin. He's Alex agreeing with Gary. Ed says Krampus.
There you go. It's Krampus.
Yeah, they made a movie about it just recently. That's the only reason I know who it is.
That's an interesting movie, too, if you've not seen it.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Very interesting.
But now, just look at this picture. Whoever drew this picture, and it was from a Austrian newspaper in the 1800s. But over here to the right, this is St. Nicholas. And St. Nicholas has brought Krampus in. It's a church-approved devil entry. And notice the tongue on this guy. That long, and always on Krampus, there's the long tongue that he terrifies the children with. And this symbolism is all too obvious. And look at Dad in this picture. Dad is enjoying it. He's enjoying it.
Have you seen the festivals they're having? They've got videos up all over the place where they take their kids out in the street and these Krampus with these little elves. They come around whipping kids and to death. And
there's a question in the chat room: is Krampus the devil or an elf?
Well, he's both. He's both, and I mean, one would presume Krampus is the leader of these dark elves, right? But you know, you could portray him as not being an elf, but that's an elf picture there, right? That's an ugly elf picture. So,
and I think that he is a pedophile spirit. I really believe that he is.
Like pain, maybe.
Yeah, and you can see Dad is enjoying. He's smiling. He loves the kids being terrified by Krampus, and you can see Mom here. Mom doesn't like it. She's trying to comfort the children, but not enough to stand up and stop the abuse. She's not going to stand up to Dad, or she's not going to stand up to the church, but she's going to try to comfort them, but not enough to stand up. And notice here to the left, there's a woman who looks to be one of the hired help, and she's hiding under a chair. She's terrified. And you just know that she had a visit from Krampus when she was small, and she knows what's about to happen, and she's hiding. And so much in this picture here.
So these dark elves were said to come from, in Norse mythology, from Nephilim, which is spelled and sounds a lot like Nephilim. I don't know whether that's a design connection or not. And they're absolutely pure evil by nature. And again, no matter where you go with these little dark elves, they take away children, they curse humans, and they drive humans mad. And you know, they always you never wanted to cross a dark elf because they would take retaliation against you. And again, the dark elves are particularly sort of known for being the elves in the Krampus, but Krampus is not always portrayed as an elf. So
and here again, we're looking at the artist rendition, but all like John said, if you haven't seen these European Krampus festivals, they are absolutely over the top. Some of the most hellish things I've ever seen. And parents are bringing their kids out of this.
And you know what was interesting at the end of that Krampus movie that came out last year is that at the end, I mean, you have all of these people that were taken away, families and everything. They're put in these little globes, right? And these special little worlds. And again, you know, a crystal globe is a portal or a different dimension. And it's very, very popular in that sort of mystical aspect. So again, they like to mix in all of these different things.
All right, let's put up the last picture here. And
one thing before we go to the last picture, I want to remind people that, because there's a lot of people now on here that weren't here when we first started. We are giving away the book that Gary Wayne wrote, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. We are giving away one free copy with a bookmark and a signed copy by Gary himself. I watched him sign it. So he's signed this book. And so to enter, okay, and make sure you keep watching because we're going to talk about a lot more stuff here. We still got time on the clock here, but the way you can win this, we had a post that advertises this show on there. It's the website. It's got our website. You can go there and watch the show. If you go there and you share the post, you have to like Now You See TV as well. So you have to be somebody that likes Now You See TV on Facebook. Okay, Facebook specific here, and you have to share the post on there. And like I said before, my son is going to pick the winner. I'm going to have him come up and just point. He can't read or anything, so he's just going to point at whatever he wants to point at, and that's how we're going to pick the winner. I'll even videotape him live saying who he's gonna pick, so you guys can know that it's completely random. But the more times you share it, the more times your name's on there, so you have a better chance of winning by far. So make sure you guys share this out. Let people know this. A lot of times people will say you guys are peddling mythology and just stupid stuff to get views. But here's the deal. The reason we would do this, okay, is not just to entertain, because it is entertaining, but it's also to keep people aware of the coming deception of the Nephilim that are coming back as prophesied. Okay, so this is one reason. And also, the people that are looking into this stuff, they're open-minded, and they are actually trying to learn. They're trying to figure out what's true. And when you bring this stuff to them, I'd rather us be explaining it to them than ancient aliens. I'd rather us be explaining to them than what's the other zeitgeist out there. I'd rather us I'd rather us be the ones talking about it. So anyways, share this out. Get people into this stuff, because people really are looking right now, especially now more than ever, with talks of aliens, with talks about supernatural things going on, with talks of transhumanism. This is a subject that, as believers, we need to be involved in. The church needs to be involved in this stuff, because they won't talk about it. People come to them with questions. They say, oh, it's just whatever. But people know better. People know better, because guess what? You can go online and you can look this stuff up just like anybody. There's no excuse anymore not to know about this kind of stuff. So share it out. Anyways, go ahead, David. Sorry. I just wanted to remind people.
That is absolutely fantastic, John. And that's our message tonight. These things are evil. They are portrayed by our culture and by many times as a lot of Christian organizations recommend Disney movies. They recommend C.S. Lewis. And these are things that are being passed off as good things. And we're here telling you tonight, these are bad things. And there's a dark reality behind these little creatures. That's why we're talking about these tonight, to bring some badly needed information on what I think is a very much overlooked topic. So let's put, okay, we got the last picture up, and this is a harder one. And after this, we're going to let Gary take some questions from the chat, but look at this picture very carefully. This, and if nobody gets it, I'll give a few clues.
I'll tell you what, if I didn't know what it was because you told me beforehand, I would never guess this. But I don't know. Gary, can you see this very well? This is an interesting picture. Okay, there you go.
Yep. Yeah, if you can hold it at that size for a bit.
And this comes from a children's story that was originally written in the 1600s. It became a part of the Mother Goose fairy tales. It has been adapted in movies and cartoons that are very popular in America.
If you look at the bottom left-hand side, there's a good hint there.
There's a good hint.
Yeah,
little entity there.
Little cat, like Puss in Boots.
All right, Gary got it. This is Puss and Boots.
Yeah, and then there's an elf holding the bowl in the background. He's got pointed ears, so he's going to be a small, light elf. And then the girl would be represented as a nymph, as in Wendy and Peter Pan, so a female. And I'm trying to figure out what the guy in the center is all about.
Tracy in the chat room was the first to get Puss in Boots.
All right, Tracy, very good. And this was a tough one. So, very good. And the fella sitting in the chair.
Well, it's probably Oberon. It's probably King Oberon of the fairies. That's probably who the guy sitting in the chair is.
Yeah, and he is an ogre.
He's an ogre?
Yeah.
He's hairy, but he's not an ogre.
Yeah. And
he doesn't look like an ogre to me. He looks like a big old fat drunk to me, but whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, here again, this is the artist's conception. But in the original Puss in Boots story, there was a poor woman that died, and she had 3 children, and there were about the only thing of value she had was her cat. So she left her cat to her children, but the cat was not a cat. The cat was a fairy that shape-shifted into the form of a cat. And in the story, the cat defeats the shape-shifting ogre, and this is the basis of the original Puss in Boots lore. But one thing I want you to look at here, what the old ogre likes to eat. On top, we have a pig again, and look underneath, we have children there that the old ogre is getting ready to eat.
Oh, and, yeah. See that over there to the left by the little bowl there.
I was wondering what it was, and I couldn't make out what was on there. But yeah, now that looks definitely is like little children or babies. One of the two.
Yeah, and he likes to eat him some pig and little babies, and all through this genre we talked about tonight, the idea of the defilement of children, the switching of children, the eating of children. And there was, you can see horrific pictures. There was one of an ogre in the middle of the night cutting a little baby's throat, and all of this defilement of the children runs all through this little fairy lore.
It sounds like Pizzagate to me.
It is. It's demonic Pizzagate. It's about the same thing, Brother Hall.
Yeah.
Wow.
I want to thank Brother Gary for letting us put him on the spot here tonight, and all the people in the Now You See TV chat for playing Name That Devil. And I'm gonna let Brother Hall get some of the questions from the chat over to Gary now. I know there's a lot of questions. This is I know I've learned a lot tonight, and all that we've learned just raises a whole lot more questions. So, Brother Hall, throw some of them at Brother Gary tonight.
The first question actually came out of YouTube. You know, I thought it was pretty good. Fairies and elves are always evil and miss. I don't know why they're promoted as cute, nice by Hollywood. Is there an agenda in doing this?
Oh, absolutely. It's to seduce you into this idea, right? That that what is coming has been around forever, and they want you to accept it, and they want you to lower your guard, and they want you to be open to these concepts. Now, having said that, I mean, you do see some movies where you see fairies and elves and some trolls and things like that who are you know, more in the horror genre than in the sort of the fairy tale. But you have to understand, like, the ones that do good are aimed at the little children, right? They're trying to connect them in right early, so they're playing to the audience with how they manipulate it. So that would be why I would think that they're portrayed the way they are. But they're certainly never portrayed as, you know, totally with all of the information that connects them back into prehistory. Although Lord of the Rings gives you, you know, some closer looks at it. I mean, if you can look at the hobbits and you understand that that's now part of the dwarf and the gnome and the earth dwellers, right? And you saw the dwarves in there, that they were the ones who crafted tools and manufactured things, and you saw elves as larger and kind of like the superior ones of the group. So they got a lot closer to this whole ideology with a few groups of them that they put in there than most other ones. But I would say that would be why.
Excellent. Lee asked, the little Nephilim, and he's taken it to the Levitical priest, is there a connection in the Torah to be a priest had to be over 5 feet tall? Is there any truth to that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to say I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question.
I gotta look at that. I gotta look at that one.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that a priest had to be over 5 feet tall, but it would make some sense, because everything that's done in the Bible is totally opposite and different than what is done in Gnosticism and polytheism, and done for a reason, whether it's blood drinking or, you know, idols and all sorts of other regulations that are put in the Old Testament. So that wouldn't surprise me that there would be something in there to say that you're not going to have that mystical reprobate type of being in with the holy part of the religion, which was totally intermixed with, as you recall me talking about earlier, with the wizards and the priests of mysticism.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Do we have a scripture? Where's that scripture at? Do they have a
If
citation?
we get it, I'd love to get that verse, because I don't ever recall reading that, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
I would
Yeah,
know that it's there, but I'd just like to have that citation so we could read it, because that's
where's the address?
Yep.
Okay, Lynn Files asks, are there different species of Nephilim living inside the earth, deep inside, in different parts of the world?
Well, there's a very, very strong mythos out there on that, and if you just from what we've talked about, it's certain types of little people living in the earth, and then there's passages in places like Ezekiel that talks about people who lived in the earth and hid in the earth. I would say it's possible, and I know David has some passages on it that he could refer to on that, but we really don't have anything that's specific that says that's where they're hiding and that they're in stasis or anything like that, and they're sleeping and really ready to wake up. It's possible, but I tend not to go there because there's just not enough to substantiate that for me.
Okay, let's see. Cott asks, do these fairies and elves manifest themselves so people can actually see them?
Yes, they do. And that's why you have so many descriptions of them throughout history, and that's why they are a lot of similarities. But they also go to their homes, and they go back to their homes into other dimensions or different portals, and to fairy mounds or shays or through the portal. So they go back and forth, is what the fairy mythos says. So they do appear, and there are many, many different kinds, as it would seem. Now, how they all survived, I mean, that's the big mystery, but one presumes they survived through these portals.
And I might just say that the only time that I believe I have ever physically seen the devil, I've told this story before, but years ago, I'd come in from work, and I laid down, and I was taking a little nap, and I was having some bizarre thoughts in a dream. And as I woke up and my eyes began to focus, it looked like there was a bug on the end of my pillow. And when I got my eyes to focus to look at it, it was a little imp. And when I focused on it and saw it, it's just like he took off. But I believe I actually saw that little thing on the end of my pillow. But that's my imp story.
Wow. Okay. Jacob asked, curiosity, leprechauns, little Nephilim. Do you think fog and steam theory in Ireland has anything to do with their genocide?
What's fog and steam? Was that fog and steam?
Fog and steam, as in rising steam.
And genocide of leprechauns?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't aware. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the genocide of leprechauns. My understanding of leprechauns is they weren't driven out. Typically what is connected when they're talking about leprechauns are connecting them to the Tuatha De Danann that were driven back to the other world. But I don't recall reading anything on, doesn't mean it's not there, but I don't recall reading anything on leprechauns in a genocide.
See here. Allison asked, is there a difference between light and dark elves, and what is it?
Well, yeah, there's a significant difference. One is good looking, and the other ones are part of the ugly ones, right? So if you understand the Krampus ones, and you see these ugly elves that are in there, they're the ugly ones, and there's a lot of ugly elves even with Santa Claus. But if you can imagine a light elf in the small form, would still be very similar to, in terms of color and complexion, of that white phantom look. in Lord of the Elves. Slim, that's a Norse light elf, as that description comes about. And some people believe that description goes right back into a look of what the Nephilim were in terms of, again, I don't have anything that suggests that they had pointy ears, but they were certainly pale-skinned. And again, as they take that back with Atlanteans and with the Scythians, they had blonde hair and blue eyes, and typically you see these royal sort of elves, the light elves, that would have that sort of look. So,
okay, let's see. Rick Rock asks, where are all the masses of these creatures, and why aren't we seeing a lot of them everywhere?
Well, one of the sort of common denominators between these little people, or these elementals, and the aliens in that mythos is they have trouble reproducing. And that's why they're kidnapping people, and they're trying to either find ways to reproduce or manipulate DNA or to create hybrids. Problem there with the reproduction, right? And so I would suggest that there aren't billions of them around, because that's what they are. But if they do travel through their portals, which is so strong in their mythos, is that there are great numbers. They're just in a different dimension.
I think
it's got more to do that they just can't reproduce properly.
I was listening to Dr. Michael Lake earlier today, just one of his shortcuts, when he was talking about the second heaven, where all these principalities and evils that we read in the scriptures, could that be a possibility of where they're coming from as far as through portals?
I would think so, yeah. I think there's different dimensions, and as we learn about string theory and quantum physics, we understand there are different dimensions, and there may even occupy the same space that we're in, right?
That's interesting.
Just at a different wavelength. So if that's the case, I mean, it's how do you change that wavelength? And I know I'm not a scientist, but how do you, get into however this sort of wavelength that this dimension is on? I think that's what the portal does. But
he went on further to say, when we believe in Yeshua, the Holy Spirit gives us that conduit into the third heaven, into the throne room. That's the only portal we need to be worried about.
Amen.
Yet with people doing Ouija boards and all this other stuff, opening portals in their homes, whatever form that takes, then they start getting manifestations in their home. And I was wondering if you thought along the same lines as that as well.
Well, it is, and as they come in, I mean, two things are happening. A, you're inviting them in, which is the big mistake, because they're going to not go away if you ever invite them in. But yeah, that's a portal into another dimension where they probably occupy, and whether or not it's a spiritual dimension or it's a dimension for these other types of mythological beings, I mean, we don't know. But we do know is all of that is designed to cross dimensions, right? And even when you're talking about spiritual guides, they're opening doors to talk to these spiritual guides. That's just another name for portal.
One thing I might add in this regard, I was reading a fellow, he was an Irish author, and he was writing about the people of Ireland. And he said there were two kinds of people in Ireland: the visible people that were the Celts, and the invisible people that were the little people. And in his story, he said that there was, in the fairy lore, there was a certain point in time where they choose to render themselves invisible. And this might connect in with the idea Gary had of end time resurgence of these little fellows and their doctrine. I don't know, but I found that very interesting.
Excellent. Anything to add with that, Gary?
No, again, that's part of that sort of changeling doctrine and that ability to be invisible, appear, and disappear. That seems part of that whole ideology. But again, it may not be magic. It could be the technology that they brought with them from the antediluvian epoch.
Excellent. Vicky asked, water nymphs, mermaids?
Well, nymphs. I mean, you can have male nymphs and female. Most of them are female, and most of them are water nymphs, and that's the ones that were in Atlantis were water nymphs. But typically, young female is a nymph, but a young female of a different variety or species or race in a true acronym. And so, but the pan god would take nymphs too, as in is a human nymph. That would be a young person. But when you're talking about nymphs, we're talking about water nymphs, we're talking about nereids, we're talking about a connection to mermaids. So as you move into the water nymphs, you move into the mermaid. And again, that's why the mermaid allegory is so much part of the fairy allegory, why it's intermixed into King Arthur. But typically, nymphs are female and water nymphs, but not 100% of the time.
Okay. Martha Ann, she says, fairies, is that where leprechauns come from?
Well, leprechauns are, as I mentioned earlier, a third class of the elementals, right? You have the leprechauns, the little people, and you have the gnomes, right? And so the leprechauns are the one that we use in the West as sort of the umbrella of the mischievous one, and a specific kind of one that's more denoted to Ireland, and dressed in little green suits and beards, but very, very mischievous. But definitely are part of the mischievous class. Whereas fairies are part of the first class of good, or not the first class, but the good-looking ones, right?
This one's a long question, so I'm going to take my time and try to articulate it correctly. About 6 months ago, this comes from Lynn. About 6 months ago, I listened to Donald Marshall's testimony. Back then, I turned him off mostly because he is pushing for a war against the Illuminati. But after learning so much the past year, I revisited Donald Marshall's videos yesterday and now believe him. He may not understand spiritual warfare because he may not know Jesus, but now his description of these physical Nephilim sound accurate. What do you have to say about Donald Marshall's shocking claims?
Not familiar with them.
Yeah, it's easy enough. Okay. John, anything on Donald Marshall that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Notice how I brought John back with that one.
Yeah. But if he's against the Illuminati, I like him already.
There you go. This one comes, I believe this one's from Dina. I heard that name again, Lilith, and I'm still curious to her identity and where she came from. I keep thinking she must have been a female Nephilim. Not for sure. Could you ask Gary to clarify regarding her if he can, please and thank you.
Yeah, either Nephilim or part of the gods. And so you do have two sources of Lilith for the main part, but even the Hebrew source, which is a consort for Adam, this is Hebrew mysticism, not Hebrew Old Testament. But in that, she was a consort to Adam before Eve was created, and wanted to dominate the patriarchy, as what the mystical people like to say. But even those roots go back to Sumeria. And who Lilith is in Sumeria is a night witch, a god, a demon. So either, again, demon or part of the demigods or part of the lower gods. But a night operating witch that, sucks the blood out of people and kills people, and an evil wind spirit in another tradition of Sumeria. And also in that sort of Sumerian tradition, the mother of Lilith, whom they would equate with somebody that we would in the Bible equate with Cain as being his wife. And I document a little bit about that in my book. But she is part of this early female matriarchal bloodline that goes back very close to the source, which is actually Tiamat, or a female Leviathan, or a female dragon in the Sumerian lore. And as it comes down through the bloodline, so again, you're talking either a Nephilim or a fallen angel here. I'm thinking more Nephilim, though. That's where I lean.
I would agree with that. and Lilith is in the Bible. In Isaiah 34:14, it says, "The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellows. The screech owl also shall rest there and find rest and find for herself a place of rest." If you look the word screech owl up, you'll find that this is Lilith. And there's an ancient Babylonian wood carving that's thousands and thousands years old that depicts Lilith. And you see this a lot on the internet if you look for this type of stuff. And there are two owls on this ancient Babylonian wood carving of Lilith right on each side of her by her feet. So Lilith is scriptural, and the Jewish women, when they were pregnant, they would pray before they went to bed to protect themselves against Lilith, because she was associated with miscarriages and abortions.
Right. And this screech owl that the Bible talks about would hop on one leg like a goat, is the description. So again, you have that sort of goat allegory. And so where Lilith fits in as a night operating witch, or Upir, which is connected to Oberon and the Tuatha Danann, and links back into vampires, is that she was an Upir night, or a Lamia as they used to call it, and that was the female blood-sucking Upir. And what's interesting like that, it flew at night like a screech owl, as this mythology goes, and that's in Greek mythology. And it was a killer of infants and sacrificed children. And Lilith, as I talked about earlier, has the matriarchal inheritance of Malkuth, or Tiamat. And so Lilith, the allegory is a screech owl, and this connects back to a Romanian word for witch or night witch, which is strigoi, which is also used for the word vampire. And Latin, that was strix, which also means screech owl. And so when you're talking about vampires, which is the male dragon line of the bloodline that I'm talking about, and understanding that the female side is part of the Lilith Upir one, you have both of the male-female bloodlines going down in allegory as vampires.
Wow, when we ask you a question, I mean, you guys just hear it. Wow. Okay. Anything to add to that, David?
Well, another question. I'm sure we've got so many, but I just want to ask Gary if you think that we could put the incubi and the succubi in this same genre we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, I think so. But they are distinct, right? I mean,
yeah, it's another little genre. But it's kind of the flavor I get. It's kind of the same.
Yeah. Thing. Yeah, because I mean, you're dealing with sex, and you're dealing with blood sucking, you're dealing with demons, and you're dealing with, this is all mystical doctrine, right?
Yeah,
it's all part of the rituals. So,
and these are very close to the understanding of a nymph, associated with sexuality, where we get our word nymphomaniac, and a lot of these take on a very distinct sexual connotations. But I just wanted to hear your input on that. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
That's interesting.
Definitely connected.
The next question, I'm just going to say to Corey, if you go to Now You See TV YouTube, David and Gary did a show a couple of months ago. It was called Pure of Sion, the Pre-Adamic Race. And it was a great show, but he's asking about modern leaders and presidents, the same kinship bloodlines as in today. Are they the same? Is that bloodline drawn out? And you guys did a fantastic job of drawing the picture of making those connections from the very beginnings all the way up to the world leaders that we have today. It was a mind-blowing show, but they are connected.
Yeah, and that was, if I remember, the question was about the presidents. Are they connected into the bloodlines?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but very much diluted bloodlines in North America, right? Not the pure bloods or the nobles, and they're trying to intermarry. And how they connect back, most of them through diluted bloodlines, back to Plantagenet dynasty, which was the same king that did the Magna Carta, Prince John, and the Plantagenet comes out of Anjou. And also William the Conqueror, which is the Norse bloodlines that intermix into Normandy and with the families of Geezer and of Anjou. So it's this royal bloodline that then goes back in time. But yes, they do like to intermarry and get connected and intermarry over time to try and ennoble those, what I call and they call pseudo blue bloods, as opposed to the pure bloods, right? So you really got to get closer into some of the royal families of Europe and some, of the 13 families to get into those pure bloods or into the pure bloodline of the Basques.
I actually had to watch that show 3 times because you guys really laid it out during that. It was. I was talking to John for like 2 weeks about that show because it was a night that he wasn't with us. But man, the way you guys just laid that out, please go back and watch that. The next question is from Corey again. He's asking about Disney. Was Disney part of the Demolay branch?
The Demo, is there a spelling on that?
Demolay branch. Demolay.
Okay. Was Walt Disney part of the Demolay bloodline?
Yeah.
It's a good question. It makes some sense that there is a connection there. He's definitely Freemason. Some believe Rosicrucian, so that means probably has some bloodlines in there. I can't confirm it, but that does make some sense.
Okay.
And if we're talking about Demolay, I think he's talking about the Grand Master of the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, if I've got that correct in terms of what they're trying to make as a connection, and that would be from the 13 bloodlines. So good possibility, but I've not chased that far enough to confirm that, but it's a good possibility.
Okay. Cott, he asks, are the shape shifters doppelgangers?
Are the shapeshifters? Well, doppelganger is kind of like a double of a person, right? As opposed to taking the image of that same person. I suppose that's possible, but typically not in that application. Shapeshifters is very much a general term and a skill or a technique that the fallen angels apparently had, and that is alive and well in fairy mythology and in science fiction and things like that, as possibly a genetic trait that would come down from the fallen angels as being their creators. So that one would presume that's how it would come about. No, I've never thought about connecting doppelganger as a shapeshifter. And again, doppelganger, is that, you can also look at that as an evil twin, but I'm not convinced that that's shape-shifting, right? Being a twin, I know all about that, but I'm not the evil one.
Okay.
A little bit of humor there.
Hey, if you're watching your brother, well, there you go.
He might argue differently, but...
Brian asked, do these things that you guys have been discussing tonight, like top of high hills, like native Indian burial grounds?
Yeah. Well, high hills, we haven't talked about that tonight, but high hills is a holy place. Even in the Bible, you talk about altars and things being built on high hills, and but more typically of polytheism than of monotheism, although some of the altars would have been on a mountain. But it was very much known as a place where heaven would connect to earth in polytheism, and that's why they wanted to go to the highest ground possible, and that's why you have holy mountains. So I'm just kind of going on about the high hills, but we haven't really talked about the Indian burial mounds, and I'm not convinced that all of those have that same type of connection to what we were talking about with fairy mounds. Different sort of one's burial, and certainly the the fairy mounds aren't burial locations.
Okay, Mark continues that question, and it's along those lines. He says the Mayans built on top of old ones, all connected underground, also still had 2-foot-high steps. He says it's hard to imagine these short people getting up and down these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have to look at the structures that are being built and for what purposes. So, I mean, and mounds are just moving earth, right? I mean, and they're usually burial mounds. So, I'm not convinced that they would have a play there. But if you're talking about megaliths structures or things built deep into the earth or pyramids, now you've got a whole different classification.
Tracy asked, was wondering about Rumpelstiltskin, real and turned into a myth?
I think it was just turned into a myth. I mean, this whole idea of turning straw into gold, that there is a connection between the ugly dwarves and alchemy, but that's part of the 7 sacred sciences. I think it's an allegory of what they're putting in there. Yeah, that's got to do with alchemy. So no, I don't think it's true.
This one goes out to both Dave and Gary. Are these little Nephilim similar to the locusts from the pit in Revelations 9, 7 through 8?
Well, no, they're not. I mean, I think they're more closer to, and I'm not even going to try and remember the name. It starts with, I think it starts with A, but you have in Sumeria, scorpion gods. You want to Google scorpion gods, you're going to get, and I did a posting on it a couple of months ago on my timeline with several different pictures of these scorpions. These were military, godlike, demonic creatures, if I can use all of that in one term. They were used to protect some of the holy places and the cult centers in the ancient world. I think those were part of those beings that were thrown into the abyss. But I don't think they have anything to do with dwarves. These are completely different beasts.
So what were you looking at in Revelations 9, David, as far as coming out of the pit? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've got all kinds of different fallen beings that have been imprisoned throughout time. And it's interesting that some fallen powers have been allowed to remain free and some have been in prison. And it's just hard telling what all's going to come out of that pit, but we know it's not going to be good.
Yeah, we know there's going to be fallen angels, and we know there's going to be the worst of the Nephilim, and what else is with them, possibly these scorpion gods. But there's a collection of things that we may not have all the information on. There might be reprobate little people coming out of there, but I'm thinking not.
We just know it's not going to be good.
Yeah, it's not going to be good.
Not going to be good. It's going to be who's who of the banished evil ones that are going to come out. And this is a spiritual reality that God's people need to prepare themselves for.
Absolutely. Alec asks, would these items of power, like the Excalibur, be much like the Ark of the Covenant, or is it just folklore?
We're talking, is the Ark Covenant or is Excalibur?
These items of power, like the Excalibur, are they much like the Ark of the Covenant, or is it all just folklore, like the Excalibur and?
Yeah. When you, I wouldn't. Yes. First, let's not conflate the Ark of the Covenant with some of this imagery that comes out of mysticism, and certainly Excalibur or Caliburn is a Scythian linkage back. And again, we talked about Scythians and the giants that came out of there, and they migrated along with the Celts to Great Britain, and that's where this legend goes back to. So when you're talking about King Arthur and Excalibur, again, this is a story of mystical history that goes back in time. And actually, the pulling out of the sword is a representation of the world leader, or the Antichrist, going to be taking over the world as the king of the time. That's why King Arthur is such a great hero, right? Because it's a Nephilim hero that's going to be like an Antichrist type figure in the end time. These are allegories, and if you understand Gnosticism and secret societies, they work on allegories, and the true story is not, the story on the surface is not the true meaning. So you have to really dig deep. So yes, Excalibur is a symbol of power, but it's an allegory within the mystical religions.
Excellent. Let's see here. I keep adding to it and the thing scrolls up. How do trolls fit into this conversation? Where are they at?
Well, the trolls are, they're part of the gnome group that I talked about, right? So, again, trolls are ugly, and you see a lot of them in the depictions with big noses, and some of them are hairy, but they're typically gatekeepers, is what they're known in prehistory. And so, and a gatekeeper, as in an allegory in some of them, is being under the bridge. You can't cross the bridge, right? They're gatekeeping to wherever that is. But that was their role for the most part, was being a gatekeeper.
Excellent. Deanna asks, I can't help but wonder if the pyramids were used for DNA experiments. If little people were small enough for them, maybe they were like little mad scientists. Fairies were known for coming up with potions and the such. Just a thought or in question. What do you think?
Yeah, well, when we talk about the 7 sacred sciences that are developed by the descendants of Cain, and they developed mysticism, and they developed these sciences to create all of these reprobate beings and violations against creation, when we talk about magic, that is an extension of these sciences, right? And so if you look at the people who started the Royal Society, which was the start of modern science, they called themselves the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists, just as that's the marking of the bridge point where they took it more into science and pacified the Roman Church so they wouldn't incriminate them quite as much. So when we talk about magi, that's where the word magic comes from, right? Or magus, right? These are the priests of the religion. So magi comes out of Chaldea, right? That's just like a Merlin or a wizard out of Atlantis, or a priest that's out of Egypt. So all of this is the application of the sciences that mixed with religion, right? And again, that's what they imagine for the end time, is that they're going to have a religion that works in harmony with science, which is mysticism, because they both have the same root. So yes, a real connection there, and you can follow that all the way through. And then you understand that you have some of these little people involved with the priest class doing specific jobs, you have the full connection.
Lonnie, she asked, so the early text of the story of Adam and Eve do tell us that Cain married his twin sister and went down into the valley with the giants. Now Isaiah tells us that Lilith is resting with her creatures. Could this be the same, that the devil is the she-devil? Weird question, I know, but wanted to ask. So,
which book does that come out of?
I have no idea. I haven't read that one. It's certainly not in this one, and if it was, I'd have to go back, because this is one book you got to keep reading.
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't equate Lilith with Hellel or Satan as being the chief devil, right? But certainly Lilith is a lower class, I think, than the female goddess. But she's in that sort of bloodstream, and she's, in with the vampire aspect of it. So yeah, there's a connection there. I just wouldn't rate her quite that high, I guess, is where I'm going with that. What do you think, David?
I think that she was an actual female Nephilim, that when she died, that her spirit continued to plague women. And that would be the best of my understanding. I think that fits with what we read in scripture and also tradition.
Yeah, so not raising her to full goddess status.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Do chimeras fit into the fairies' storyline at all?
Yes, to a certain degree, because it's a violation against creation, and all violations against creation are part of that Nephilim concept that you were talking about, that Rob Skiba likes to. I shouldn't say likes to, but groups as all part of the same sort of concept. And so anything that's in that chimera, or as we see today with transhumanism and all these other aspects that they're doing with science, this is the same concept. So it is related. It's a different branch of it, but it is related, definitely.
All right. Moving on, Zion. For Gary, what about mermaids? Do they also have a foot in reality still?
Well, they certainly have a larger than life sort of life in this mythology, and mermaids are completely connected to the fairy allegories and stories. And that's why, mermaids, whether it's Mary Maid, which you hear Maid Marian in Robin Hood is kept alive, or you have Morgan Le Fay, which is, Morgan comes from Morgan, which is a word for mermaid coming out of Wales and connected to fairies. Like this is and they're connected, as I said earlier, to the Nereids, and the water female nymphs are very much connected to the mermaids in prehistory and mythology. So possibly, and why not? Again, a fish-like cross being that fits in with all these other violations against creation, and there's so many of them. But what I do know is this, that I think there's a strong likelihood that all of these horrible things were going on in creations before the flood in so many different ways we can't even imagine. So I think probably yes, because they're so prominent in the mythology that is kept alive.
Now, I'm from Kentucky, so I'm going to butcher this last name, and I wholeheartedly apologize. But Tina Tomowiski, am I saying that right? Tomaszewski says, please say hi to Gary for me. So I think it's worth saying it.
Well, thank you.
She just wanted to say hi.
Hi back to you.
Okay, Giorgio, how are the Nephilim able to materialize in the world? Are they born out of women?
Well, that's how they're originally created, was born from fallen angels and women. If you're talking about how they're going to be returning to the earth, again, I think there's three different kind of ways of that happening, maybe four, but I would say that we have the descendants of Nephilim, right? And these are the seeds that are talked about as they come down in Daniel through the empires and the royal families, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be leading the 10 empires at in the end time. So that's one. Secondly, you could have the angels escaping from the abyss, creating new Nephilim, or angels that are already out and rebellious but weren't locked up, starting to recreate them. So yes, they could do that again. And some people believe that they were saved in stasis. That we were talking about being hidden in caves. I guess that's another way. The only thing that we do know is that what is a Nephilim by definition, if we're talking about the giants, they were created between the copulation of fallen angels and human females. So if we're going to have new Nephilim created, that's how it's going to happen. Or it's the descendants, but I also think this transhumanism ideology is the Nephilim concept, or the new man concept, that is playing a role. So I think we have to kind of wait and see how that's going to play out.
This has been a very, very interesting question and answer session, and I always enjoy hanging out with you guys because I learned something new. But this next I don't know if it's a question, but it's I need all hands on deck for this one. John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, this comes from Rachel, and she leaves an email and a phone number, and I'm not going to read those out loud, and we'll sort those out after the show. She says, David, Donna, John, Gary, anyone. I have a 16-year-old cousin. Last night said she had noticed my walk and wanted to talk about the Bible. So after 3 hours, I ended up finding out she knows someone with a satanic Bible. She used a Ouija board, and some of her friends have found a witch. She has a pentagram on it, an open fire pit with a circle around it, and she gave her contact number. So I'll be passing it along to Donna and David. And Gary, if you want to step in too, and I know John, if you want that's there. I am friends with John and Gary, the Virtual House Church on Facebook. Maybe easier to find me there. She really wants help, and but she wants to make sure she's doing the right thing. She's been able to see things that aren't seen by most since the age of 3 or 4. Please help me, and please keep this young girl in your prayers. Her sister, who is 12, I think, is being troubled because she completely switched and goes crazy to the point she cuts her legs and arms, and I need to get them from the dark side. And I'm bringing this to your attention that maybe you guys can speak to this, and then I'll give you her contact number, and you guys can go from there. But I think it's very important that this be addressed in some fashion or form.
I just want to say I've dealt with a very similar person in my past, and when I guess this was roughly 4 years ago, this girl actually cut her throat and tried to kill herself. She had been summoning demons, and she wanted deliverance. My suggestion, and of course David's way more experienced and Donna are way more experienced in this than me. I've done a few of these, and this situation sounds very similar. First off, be discerning, be in prayer, pray heavily. I would fast as well and ask Yahweh what he would have you do in this situation, because you really need to talk to the person as well and talk to them and see where they're at, because if they're not ready, I talked about a little bit in one of our shows before, if they're not ready to give up their lifestyle and completely follow the Most High and be indwelled with the Holy Spirit, it's dangerous to cast the demons out of them. I learned this the hard way with this girl. She came to me and said that she was demon possessed. She's seen demons. Her boyfriend confirmed that this was happening. I naively just cast the demon out of her right there, and it left. But a week or two later, they came back stronger because she was not prepared to leave her old lifestyle behind. And that was partly, I believe, my fault because I didn't explain all that stuff to her. Plus, I'm not taking all the blame because people have to make that decision on their own as well. But you have to be discerning on whether or not they're really ready to do this and be talking with them and seeing where they're at. Because if they're not ready to completely leave everything behind, and they're not those who give up their life will gain it and gain their life in eternity. She has to be willing to give up her former way of life. It has to be. That's my suggestion for sure on that. But I would definitely refer to David on this. David, what do you think?
That is absolutely good advice. And I will say that if this lady would like to call us and talk to us about this, I'm sure Donna will hook up with her there in the chat, and we would be more than happy to talk and pray with her about this situation.
Yeah, because definitely there's one thing that a lot of people have no idea. You can cast out a demon out of anybody. You have all power in the name of Yeshua, Jesus, whichever name you decide to use on that. They're both the same name. I know there's people that say, oh, if you don't say the name Jesus, you can't cast out a demon. There's those that say if you don't say the name Yeshua, you can't cast out a demon. He knows who we're talking about. He knows who he is. He knows who he is. So, but the Bible talks about it leaving and then coming back with 7 more evil spirits coming back to the person if they are not repentant. If they don't repent, if they don't change their ways, and they don't seek the Holy Spirit, seek Yeshua with all their heart and soul and mind, and follow after him, believe in him 100%, then they will be repossessed again, and it'll happen again, and it'll be worse. Like I said, this girl ended up cutting her throat and almost killing herself. and it even just came back worse upon her and everything like that. I mean, ended up everything's okay with her now, but at that time, that's what happened. So I don't let anybody tell you, yeah, you can cast out a demon, but if they're not ready to repent, that's different. I mean, you have to really feel this stuff out. You can't just, I mean, you can do it. I mean, it'll work for a little while, but I'm telling the truth. I've done this before. This is David's done this before. We're not putting you on saying this to make it look like it's some kind of ritual. Definitely, I wouldn't take her to your local pastor either. I've made that mistake before too, and so you have the power in the name of Yeshua to do so. So,
and this is the whole basic concept of what people call deliverance or casting out devils. When a person is willing to repent, the devil can be cast out. And any Christian that's a born-again believer can cast out devils, just like it says in Scripture. And I literally, I'm sure Donna remembers this, but back when we were attending an assembly, well, we was head of an assembly that we started, we ministered to a lady and cast the devil out of her, and we took her to church, and literally by the time she got back to church, she had been reinfested. And this is a reality. And it is just so well stated that if a person isn't willing to give their heart to the Lord in all sincerity, you'll do them harm instead of blessing in ministering deliverance and casting out devils. It's nothing to play with. And you can literally destroy people, especially people that are very hurting and very fragile. But if that person is willing to turn to the Lord, there's nothing the devil can do to keep that person in bondage.
And definitely don't take her to a Catholic priest. They do a rite that has nothing to do with the situation that Yeshua used when he cast the demons out. They do a ritual that actually goes back to paganism. That was their form of casting devils out of people. And I'm sure Gary and David can back me up on that one. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's not a right, it's a wrong.
Right.
But absolutely.
Well, when it was posted, it was very much, this person needs some help. So I'm glad you left your email and phone number. We'll pass those on to Miss Donna and David, and we'll be lifting you up to Yahweh.
Amen.
Are you there, John?
Is that the last one? What do you want? What do you want from me?
That's the last one.
Okay.
I want you to talk, buddy.
Yeah, this show was awesome. It was amazing. It was a great show. There's a lot of the great people in the chat, and even on YouTube. And there's some people now that are obviously slamming the idea of religion, but overall they had a good time in there. But I wanted to end this one more time before you go. Don't forget to get your chance to win this. You have to go to Now You See TV on Facebook and like the page. You have to do that. No doubt about it. You have to go like the page on Facebook. Now You See TV, spelled out NOWYOUSEE TV. There's only one. Go there, like the page, share the post that advertises this show. Share it. There's already like 44 people that have shared it so far. Maybe more by now. So keep sharing it. I want to see it go up there because, like I said, the more you share it, the more groups you share it on stuff, the better chance you're going to have to win because of the method that I'm using to do it. And so, also, Gary Wayne has this book. It's called Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Go out and check it out and buy it. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Genesis6conspiracy.com. You can get it on, you can get it at Barnes & Nobles. You can get it pretty much anywhere. This is a great book, very big book. This will take you time to go through. This is basically, in my opinion, a textbook on the Nephilim. It'll take you from the very beginning to the very end, to their end goal. The subtitle is How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And we also did like kind of a short documentary with you, David, and when we met you in Gary, when we met you in Nashville, that's really good as well. If you want to know a little bit more about it, the I think we just named it Genesis 6 Conspiracy or something along those lines. And you can go back and you can see he breaks it down from point A to point Z all the way through on this stuff. Excellent book. A lot of research gone into this book, and also make sure you guys go to FOJCradio.org, right, David?
.com.
Every time.
Radio.com.
FOJCradio.com. David has a show tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. So make 10 o'clock Central. So make sure you guys go over there and check that out. David has a lot of good content. He has a YouTube channel as well. FOJC Radio. Check it out. Go sub it. Sub this channel if you like the content. And that's about all I got to say. I just appreciate you guys. This is an amazing show. We thank you guys so much. We thank you for all your positive comments. The good outweighs the bad. We have a lot of negative comments, a lot of negative people that, try to tear us down. But, as time goes on, the more there's going to be more of that. So we get that. And those of you that have been following me on Facebook, you've seen my frustration. I want to apologize for that because honestly, I shouldn't be worried about it because that's bound to happen. That is something that is going to happen no matter what. So anyways, thank you guys so much. Anything else anybody wants to say before we take this off?
Well, I just want to thank John and all the Now UC TV listeners. I want to thank my staff for all the great work she did helping me research for this program, and want to thank Gary Wayne. He's one of our favorite people to have on, and like John said, buy a copy of his book. You won't be disappointed. It's got so much good information on so many topics, and I know that we're going to want to have Gary back on again. He's one of our favorite people and one of our favorite guests. I always enjoy and learn a lot when we have Gary on, and I know that all the listeners do too. So thank you, Gary, very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, I think everybody knows I love to talk about these things, and sometimes I get a little bit passionate, but we are having fun, but we are giving very, very good information that people need to think about. And as we talk about this, the thing that we didn't really underline a lot tonight is this is a constitutive part of the polytheist religion of secret societies. And so when I'm talking about that, that's the Gnostic religion that we're talking about. And they actually believe in the elven bloodline that holds the fate of the Grail bloodline and the fate of the world. And that's the elf thing that we were talking about. It's the elven bloodline, and it's the Magianic bloodline in their belief system. And it goes back through the elven race of the Tuatha De Danann.
Thank you so much, Gary. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Said, amen. I'm very glad that, and I do believe that this is a neglected topic, and I'm just glad we got to talk about it tonight. Really enjoyed it. I know the listeners did too.
And I will be announcing the winner on Facebook on Tuesday. Okay, Tuesday I will be announcing the winner, or I'm sorry, Monday, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow, I'll be announcing the winner on Facebook. So make sure you go to that page, you like it, and also follow it, because if you follow it, you'll actually see when we post a video, because you can like it and not follow. That's one little loophole that Facebook has to get me to have to pay to have all the people that like my channel to see my posts, which I hate doing. So go there and like it and follow it so you can see the post when I announce it. And I'll call it Genesis 6 Conspiracy Giveaway, and it'll be a live video of my son picking the winner, and you guys can see it right there. If your name is called, then you will have to present me with your physical address in a message, and I will send it to you Tuesday. So make sure you guys do that. Otherwise, your chance of winning is nothing, because if you don't respond to me within a day or two, I'll have to pick somebody else. So keep that in mind. Make sure you follow. But blessings. High five, everybody, as always. Shalom. And until next
Shalom, everybody.
This is Now UC TV.